Welcome to What Do Siblings Talk About?
I'm Jacob,
And I'm Veronica.
and we're siblings.
Yay.
And we're back with episode 8. We have another influencer review here, and this is my choice again. Unfortunate viewers may start to notice a trend.
Yeah, I have questions about this.
Some of the this might bear some similarities to a previous influencer review episode that I also chose back in episode 4, I think. But today we have Pitch Meeting with Ryan George. To give a little background, I've known about this guy, I think, since some of the very early days of Pitch Meeting, which is not all that long ago. We're talking about back to around 2018. Part of the reason he caught on pretty fast is he started making these videos for Screen Rant. And this being the 20-teens, there were a lot of publications like Screen Rant, which still had a lot of viewership, and that was the way people were getting popular and content was being shared widely. I think the social media and entertainment and just media in general world is actually dramatically different now. But anyway, he caught on pretty quickly and has branched out to do other things now, but still kind of his classic content, which he still produces, is these videos called Pitch Meetings. So, Veronica, I think you were new to Pitch Meeting?
Yes. Yeah, I was completely unaware that this existed. Actually, I was unaware that this genre of like people commenting on movies existed at all.
Oh, okay.
So this is both of these influencers. I had zero idea that this category of person existed. So yeah, you've opened a whole new world.
Very nice. Okay. So, are you familiar with like the whole concept of what this is, a pitch meeting?
Yes. Yeah. But I don't know if you want to like explain briefly like what his...
Yes. So Ryan plays two opposing characters, and maybe I will actually share an example right now. He plays two characters in this, and this would be sort of a classic presentation for trying to sell your idea in a Hollywood studio. I'm not an expert on this, but I know a little bit about this.
Well, a bit so like people have elevator pitches where they're like, here, you have 90 seconds to, sell your product or whatever it is.
Yep. So typically in a media environment, you will have producers and then you'll have writers or writer's room. And the writers might already be associated with a project, or they might be freelancers who are coming to present an idea that they have that they would like to get made into a show. So Ryan, I apologize. We're paused on not the most flattering image of Ryan here. Ryan plays two characters. He plays both the writer and the producer. So what the character we're watching here, you'll see a dramatic difference between the two of them. This is producer guy, and the other character you'll see is writer guy. So I'll share the first little bit of his review or his pitch for Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
So, you have a movie for me?
Yes, sir, I do. So it's based on this fantasy book series, right? Which has sold a lot of copies.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I got bored by the word book there for a second, but I'm listening now. So what's this series about?
Well, it's called Harry Potter, sir, and it's about this kid called Harry Potter.
I understand completely.
All right, so there's my example for now. That's pretty typical of Ryan George content, at least in the pitch meeting stuff.
Yeah.
So I have an initial question, Veronica, which is what do you think of this presentation style where it's just one guy, but he's doing these very quick edits back and forth?
I mean, I really like it. It's very clean, and even like you said, I think this is a relatively recent video, but even if you look at some of his original ones, like from the get-go, he was very good at it.
Yes.
So yeah, no, I find it very engaging. They're entertaining to watch. They're only 5-6 minutes long.
Yep.
So yeah, I think it really draws you in. It to me, uh, I would say, yeah, I would probably prefer it to the more I don't know what you want to call it, like analog style of someone sort of just reading a review and showing clips.
Yeah, or like two people making a podcast and just
Yeah,
their faces being shown the whole time.
exactly.
No editing. So I want to give Ryan George credit. I think this style of cuts has caught on where people have realized, oh, I can play all the characters in this show.
Yeah,
I just need to, change my personality a little bit, or maybe make it funny by not changing my personality and
and
acting
never
like I'm
referencing
completely
it.
different.
Yeah,
Yeah, acting like I'm completely different characters.
yeah,
Um, but to give Ryan George credit, he started making these around I think 2018, and he was already doing this style, and I had never seen it before. And this is one of the things that intrigued me was it's hard to do this. Like you have to write
yeah,
the characters in advance because you're not reacting in real time. You
yeah,
have to know what each character is going to say and each one is going to react to. Maybe the best similar-ish case would be when you have actors who have to play like identical twins and you don't have identical twin actors. So like Lindsay Lohan in The Parent Trap
sure.
from the
Sure, where
'90s.
you're acting to like a baseball on a stick off screen or something.
Yeah, I think sometimes they would have fill-ins as the other themselves, but it's
Yeah,
not actually what the audience is then going to see. So you're actually relying on the abilities of the actor themselves to be able to pull that style
yeah.
off.
Well, and
So I want
just
to give
to
yeah
yeah, just to remember, like, I mean, it's one thing just to read both parts and sort of sync them together, but then you also, like you're saying, you have to remember all of the intonation that you were doing as each character, so you are reacting appropriately, so it looks like a seamless conversation, and not like someone just reading lines.
yep. And there are workarounds for this sort of thing. Is you can pre-record yourself. You can pre-record yourself in what you think is the appropriate cadence and timing, and then play it back in your ear. But that's hard.
Sure.
That's a lot of like advanced and technical work. And aside from that, the cuts are so fast. There's no delay. There's no free space. You'll see in Ryan's earlier pitch meetings, there is a little bit more drag, but they're still very tight. Um,
Yeah.
so I want to give him credit for that. I do think he has a background in entertainment, like
I
as an
think I
actor.
think he is an actor because I think he has an IMDb page. Um, but I feel like pitch meeting has taken over to where this is now the main thing he does.
Yeah, although he does have his own channel, he is on at least three different channels. So he started out on Screen Rant. As far as I know, he started out on Screen Rant. But now there's a dedicated pitch meeting channel, which I presume is his,
Hmm.
and his own channel, which I think is just called Ryan George, and he makes other types of content there. Um, so
Yet
for
another
starters,
of the
Veronica.
the friendly Canadian actors who's come south to
Yeah,
Florida.
actually, good point. Ryan George is a Canadian, and I think that's actually relevant to some of the things I want to discuss about him in a little bit.
He's just
Um,
so friendly and approachable.
yeah. Uh, so, initial thoughts from a new viewer.
Well, like I said, I really liked him. I initially I was just gonna watch a few so that we could do this episode, and I ended up watching quite a lot of them.
You're
Um,
devoted to your research.
yes, just all for research. I watched a lot of things that I've never seen the movie for, and I have no intention of seeing the actual
Same.
movie. But I mean, that again, that speaks to his, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, like entertainment value. That I will sit down and watch him review a movie that I have absolutely zero intention of ever watching, and still find that entertaining.
So, why, aside from what we've said so far? Like, what's his. So far, we've commended his editing, his acting ability, but what's What's the catch?
It is a mystery. His je ne sais quoi. Um,
Yeah.
I think I think it's something maybe that a lot of people like to do when they watch movies is they like, poke holes in it and go, well, why, we just had a character in this scene doing this, and now we flash forward and something sort of inconceivable has happened, and we're just supposed to suspend our disbelief, and that's a lot of what he does is look into these inconsistencies and these plot holes and go, well, that was a stupid idea, but we're just going to ignore it. The audience will never notice it. And I think, like I said, I think that's something a lot of us like to do when we're watching movies. In some movies, you have to suspend your disbelief a little more than other movies. But so I think so he's sort of picking up on that natural tendency to look for inconsistencies and plot holes and really leaning into it.
Yeah, I agree with your take, and I think this is where he bears a lot of similarity to the critical drinker.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe what attracts me to both of them is the ability to condense a big, sweeping, multi-faceted and dimensional story and just condense it down to, okay, here's the basic, what's going on. And that you can go overboard on that. You can say, well, every story fundamentally reduces down to Seven Samurai.
Yeah.
That bugs me a little when people are like, oh yeah, every story is fundamentally, based on the same story that Star Wars is based on. And yada yada. Yeah. Okay, that's a bit reductive, I think, but I think what I enjoy about what Ryan George does is I think he brings humor and entertainment in a couple of different ways to what he's talking about. But one of the ways is simply reducing a story to basically what's going on and kind of getting the fluff out of the way and helping you realize, oh, that's not good storytelling.
Like that's
why did they do
so
that?
Incongruous. No, and he'll point out like very problematic things. Like, I mean, if you watch, I think he does all of the Harry Potter movies. So like if you watch him, he'll point out various times where, basically children kill people and it's no one has any reaction because, half of the characters are children. It's just 11-year-olds wandering around killing various things. Which, so actually, when you think about it, is kind of problematic.
Yeah, and actually to comment on that briefly, J.K. Rowling has been criticized repeatedly for the deaths in her stories not being impactful. Which I think is a fair criticism. She has a hard time writing impactful deaths. Like, death should be an impactful thing, I think, in most storytelling, except for like what's the one about the policeman? Hot Fuzz.
Idea. Oh, yeah. The one about the policeman, Hot Fuzz. Yeah, of course.
Obviously, the one about the policeman. But back to Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, just to play a little more, to give an example of the way he breaks down a plot element, and you're like, oh, maybe that doesn't work as well as it did in the in my.
So anyway, we're gonna meet this wizard Dumbledore, right? And he wants to leave baby Harry with his non-magical family, but he doesn't want to be seen doing magic in the suburbs. So what does he do? He does some magic in the suburbs. He turns all the streetlights into flying magic balls and zips them down the street at him. I think walking down the street normally might have drawn less attention than the magic flying light balls. Maybe. So Dumbledore.
Writer guy just going right through that.
Yeah. Well, in the other thing that I think adds to the entertainment is like he's doing these two characters, but it's not just it's not just two sort of very one-dimensional characters. He actually has, each of them has a little personality and sort of catchphrases that they'll do back and forth to each other. So you'll constantly see writer guy just with these ridiculous plots, and occasionally producer guy will go, wait a minute, that won't work, and the writer guy will be like, oh hold up, I just we need to pad this out for 2 hours. That's why I put that scene in there.
Yep. So I think to me most often, and I think this is because writer guy is the person trying to sell, his story, and producer guy is the guy who gets to decide whether to buy it or not. Writer guy is usually portrayed as sort of the straight man, who's more genuine and tries not to make a fool of himself. And producer guys, they're kind of to spoil his day a lot of the time.
Producer guy's an idiot who just cares about making money and maybe wants to buy Quebec.
Yeah, he might not be the only one. It's not just Canadians these days.
Yeah, but there are a lot of funny catchphrases.
Yes. So did any strike you in particular?
Well, so yes. So a lot of times, producer guy will start questioning various plot points and how it's all going to fit together, and writer guy's response will be like, "I'm going to need you to get all the way off my back on that. just ignore that whole thing. Don't question it." So yeah, there's that one, and if writer guy comes up with some sort of very impressive thing, producer guy's response will be, "Wow, wow, 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 wow."
Yeah.
That's funny.
Here's another classic, I think.
Well, sounds like it's going to be impossible for him to break out of there. Actually, it's going to be super easy, barely an inconvenience. Oh, really?
So
That
this
might
is in
be
basic.
my favorite. Super
Yeah,
easy,
this is in
barely an
basically every.
inconvenience.
Yeah, so writer guy will get himself into basically an impossible difficulty where you need a real Deus ex machina to extract the story, and he'll be confronted by producer guy and just again blow right past that. But this is a pretty famous phrase on the internet at this point, actually.
Probably my favorite one, and this is spoiler alert for anyone who's not seen the last James Bond. Turn off now. But okay, now they're gone. James Bond dies in the end. But when they're going through this, writer guy gets to the point where James Bond is like stuck on an island and there's missiles incoming and he's about to die, and producer guy is like, oh gosh, how's he gonna get out of there? And normally that's where the writer guy would be like, well, actually, it's going to be super easy, barely an inconvenience. And instead, he just sort of looks at the camera and goes, yeah, he dies.
Yeah. See, that's good acting too. Subversion of expectations.
Yes.
Just like The Last Jedi, classic comedic.
Yeah. But that's where like he has fleshed out these two characters to a point where you have an expectation of how they're going to react and how they're going to, how writer guy is going to pitch his stuff and how producer guy is going to react to it. So they're like fully fleshed, sitcom sort of characters.
Yeah, and this reminds me of the point we also talked about on a previous episode about the value of stereotypes. Mm-hmm. Where if you can give an audience, give a reader or a watcher something they can kind of grasp and they become familiar with, then you've already given them so much content to work with. Like, I think this is a reason we see so much fan fiction written, for example, and such. It's so easy to take a popular, they call it IP, but a story that sold really well in some format, and generate more content from it, and you're going to get an audience. Because I think everyone instinctually, the depth you can go to and the familiarity, so the connection that you can generate with an audience, so much is already there if you give them something that they can just quickly wrap their head around, they're already attached to, and then you do something else with that. Yeah,
you have that existing framework that you can then take that and just kind of riff on it endlessly. And you don't,
maybe
you don't
not
have
endlessly,
to
but
well,
Kathleen Kennedy.
I don't know how much fan fiction you've seen. Some of it is pretty endless.
Can and should might differ here.
Yeah, but yeah, you don't have to do that upfront legwork of establishing the characters in the situation. You can just dive right into telling a story.
Yeah. Now, you had a question about Ryan here in terms of whether he's pointing to an overall issue or just picking blockbusters that fit his shtick. What made you ask this? Were you
Yeah,
initially curious about like what the point of the show is, or
well, yes, to a certain extent. I guess. So a lot of what he does are it's Marvel and comic book movies, and so after watching quite a lot of them, um, I sort of started to question and say, okay, is this because he's particularly into comic book movies? Is this because Hollywood is just producing a lot of them right now? Like that's sort of the Hollywood thing. We're in the comic book era. Um, or is he cherry picking and going for ones that he's already interested in, or are we just producing a lot of them, or is it some combination of that? And I
yeah.
guess related to that, are is it just sort of a feature of comic book movies that they're poorly written, so there's a lot of fodder for him there?
Yeah, that's a good point about comics and the type of writing that goes into them. I think poorly written might be one way to say that, but another might be there's a kind of way that comics have come to be written. Things like Marvel comics over the 80-ish years that people have been writing them, to where there's certain kinds of tropes, certain types of behavior
Hmm.
that you can expect and not say, whoa, you just broke the rules.
Yeah.
Sort of the same way the fantasy world has come to exist, where everybody now has an expectation to some degree of what an elf is going to be in any story that has an elf. And in that case, a lot of that goes to Tolkien
Hmm.
kind of writing the foundational descriptions. And Tolkien was actually inventing stuff there, because before Tolkien, elves were honestly a lot more like goblins, typically,
Yeah.
or frequently. And not like orcs goblins. I'm talking like little mischievous creatures who kind of have their own idea about things that are
Like
not very fair.
leprechauns.
Yeah, yeah.
um
So I think maybe you are touching on something that is going on, in which Ryan is playing into, is that he's the comic book stories that have been made into movies, or even just new stories that have been written for comic characters, are adapting one type of literature for a completely different presentation style that has different rules about what
mhm.
what is and isn't permissible in this kind of universe. That when you're trying to make a big budget movie, it does kind of come across as comedic and ridiculous,
Hmm.
because we have expectations about the kinds of things that you're allowed to do in a big budget movie. Um, and being a weird green dude who zooms around on a flying hoverboard and has a ridiculous costume
Yeah.
is like not it's not a thing you do in a mainstream movie.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. No, yeah, no, I think, yeah, that that makes sense.
I think it's
Um
also maybe he is trying to target popular stuff for sure,
yeah.
but it's also speaking to some extent to who he is. He was a dude starting out around 30 when he was beginning to make his content, and you again, I've mentioned this before, the demographics of YouTube skew in certain directions, both age wise and gender wise. So I think maybe some of what he's catering to also is the biggest audiences
Yeah.
out there, at least with his initial content.
Yeah, so this is what he would probably watch himself, and it's
Yeah.
what a lot of people out there are watching. So may as well make content for that audience rather than, doing a pitch meeting of Pride and Prejudice or something.
Yeah, I don't think he did that. He would do like Pride and Prejudice and zombies.
Yeah. Yeah, I did a little. He has made a lot of videos, but I did a little bit of searching, and yeah, not too much of
You
like
couldn't find the great Laurence Olivier
literature
Shakespearean
reviews.
dramas in his repertoire.
No, I mean, there's Love Actually in there. That might be the closest to to Jane
Yeah.
Austen, which I'm not sure I should even put those in the same sentence, but
So I have a question for you. We've gone through a couple of his classic catchphrases, which I usually look forward to. Although if you're watching a bunch of his videos in succession, it can
yeah,
get
if you
kind of
watch
old.
like an hour in one go, which I definitely didn't do last night, it does get a little old.
So one of the ones that I enjoy, and I think this is partly me being a guy, is the innuendo that
Oh, it's tight.
producer guy always ends up getting set up for something really
Yeah,
inappropriate. Like I think
yeah. Well, I think in the Harry Potter, there's a point where writer guy is talking about one of the child characters killing an adult, and and producer guy is like, "Ah, school children killing adults with no consequences is tight." It's
yeah.
like, but yeah, he usually gets backed into saying something is tight, which is either deeply disturbing or inappropriate or both.
Exactly. So that's one of my
Yeah.
favorite.
Yeah.
Maybe
And
we'll
then
pull up an
occasionally
example.
occasionally writer guy will come back and be like, how do you have an opinion on this very specific weird thing already?
Yep. So I brought up the critical drinker previously, and I want to jump back to that because I'd like to talk about some differences that I think are significant. Um, and the biggest, I think I would say, are especially as the critical drinker's popularity has grown, he has shifted to becoming increasingly less of a style critic to becoming more and more of a cultural critic,
Hmm.
to the point where I think he's even been he's even done like a podcast with Ben Shapiro. Um,
Yeah.
so which points to like Ben Shapiro's not going to do a podcast with a person who he doesn't think has like an interesting take on cultural issues that is like distinctly conservative.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
so Ryan George, to me, actually does a pretty impressive job of steering clear of kind of some of the cultural hot points when it comes to the political divide. Did you observe that?
Yeah, he in if you were to watch like you're saying, like a critical drinker review of a Marvel movie, the critical drinker would definitely bring up, like if they randomly added in a gay character for no reason other than to have a gay character in the movie. The critical drinker would bring that up and comment on it, and explain how they obviously just threw it in and it doesn't do anything for the story. Ryan George would probably not bring it up at all.
So yeah, there's a perfect example of this right now where recently Disney's Snow White, the live action version with
Mhm.
Rachel Ziegler and what's her name, the Israeli Gal Gadot, um, recently came out, and the film and its pre-release stuff was there was enormous backlash, and I think for some good reasons. And Disney did massive revisions of the way it was originally going to be, um, including actually scrubbing out some of the culturally sensitive content they initially planned for it. The Seven Dwarfs, for example, were originally supposed to be mostly normal sized people and not all male and of varying ethnic backgrounds.
No,
Um,
those are the seven thieves. You got confused.
no, there were originally just one group of seven, I think. Anyway, but the biggest stuff came out around Rachel Ziegler doing promo materials and having very strong political views about stuff. And you'll see a lot of reaction to that movie focusing on Rachel Ziegler and her political ideas and maybe Disney's attempted content. But I just watched Ryan George's pitch meeting for it, and he doesn't go after that at all. He does think it's a
Yeah.
mediocre movie, but he goes after it on basically artistic grounds.
Yeah.
Um, he makes fun of Rachel Ziegler, but
Because she looks like Lord Farquaad.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah, but it's not. Yeah. Whereas the critical drinker would comment on how she was sort of trying to be a modern feminist and said all these wild things in interviews and sort of trashed the movie she was making. Critical Drinker would bring up all of that and comment on it.
So
Whereas,
do you have thoughts on these different styles and sort of the uses and misuses of them?
yeah, I mean, they're definitely doing two different things, and I think maybe when they started, they were doing a much more similar thing. But as you pointed out, the Critical Drinker, maybe now that he has more confidence, can kind of be his own person and say what he really thinks. Um, but I don't know. I think they are complementary in that they have slightly different aims.
Mm-hmm.
The Critical Drinker ends up being, I think, more serious, and then Ryan George, probably because he doesn't delve into any of the hot button issues, ends up being a little more frivolous. But not necessarily in a bad way. It's they're sort of hitting something from two different angles. So, and maybe it's his Canadian niceness, where he's not going to step into any of the culture wars. He's just going to
Yep.
point out, obvious flaws that everybody can pretty much agree on.
Yeah, and I don't even think just Canadian niceness, but sort of particularly in the last 25 years or so, Canadian culture has become more, I'm going to say, more reactionary to American culture and what is sometimes perceived as the excesses of American culture. So I think it's much, much more socially unacceptable to be extremely political a lot of the time in Canada, or
That's
what
seen
is
as being
perceived as
American.
extremely. Yes, and there might be some virtue to that. I think America's great, but I think America's uniquely good in certain ways, and that actually makes it uniquely terrible in some other ways. We don't need every country to be America.
Yeah.
In general, I agree and like what you have to say about the distinction between Ryan George and the Critical Drinker. I think there's something to be said for both. Although I would give some credit to the Critical Drinker or to Ryan George rather, for intentionally focusing on just critiquing the art and not on the sort of political undercurrents of the art. Although sometimes that's poorly done. I think there is something to be said for figures like the Critical Drinker, or another big example of this would be Jordan Peterson, who we're talking to a lot of people across the political divides when they first started becoming popular, and increasingly started finding themselves overwhelmingly moving into sort of what would be considered a more conservative or traditional political camp. And in doing that, I think there are some risks. One is you lose part of your audience, which if you're a good voice, it's worthwhile to not
Lose
kind of
people.
plant
Yeah.
your flag somewhere that's automatically
people.
going to make people reject you.
Yeah.
But I think there's also a danger if you allow yourself to fall a little bit too much into one tribe, that you start to make it harder for yourself to see the good in the other side, which I think is something really valuable. I'm not saying that's what's happened with a Jordan Peterson or the Critical Drinker, but I think there is a danger there. That if it can be avoided, it's worth avoiding that. I think, as I mentioned in a previous episode about, I thought it was Fahrenheit 458 or whatever, but it's The Day After Tomorrow, which is a very liberal movie with a liberal intent, but I found really powerful for reasons other than maybe the political drive behind it. So anyway, just my thoughts. I think also what might be going on with people like the Critical Drinker is they just weren't political before. They didn't think about wow, what's the real moral and cultural impact that's going on here? Oh, wait, do the people behind these great artistic projects have like moral preconceptions that they think are more important than the art, and they're trying to like shape the
Yeah.
souls of the people who consume this? So I think some of it's that as
Yeah.
well,
It's sort of
where
you're awakening to something that you didn't realize before, and then suddenly you see it everywhere.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
So yeah, so there's me playing both sides if I can a little bit on that.
But
Um,
well, but I mean, to go back to what we were talking about before, I think there is value to both of them. You know, it's a little bit like I don't know if you. I'm trying to make up an analogy on the spot. If there's like a, you know, a hot pink pyramid in the middle of your city, um, this is going to be a bad analogy. Uh, Ryan
Las
George will
Vegans feel called out.
yeah, Ryan George will like point at it and go like, haha, it's hot pink. That's ridiculous. And the critical drinker will go, well, yes, it's hot pink, and also it's a pyramid. That was a terrible analogy, but there's there's value. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I feel like Ryan George. I don't want to say juvenile, but he's much more black and white of just looking at kind of very basic things and pointing out the problems with them, versus the critical drinker is going into more. Yes, he's covering the black and white stuff, but also going into more shades of gray and more sort of the detail and the intentionality behind some of the issues. You can
Yeah.
ignore the whole pink pyramid thing.
I was wondering where we were going with that, but I think like in
I was
our
trying to come up with some sort of
you're
deep,
like one of the
profound.
flowers in the Snow Queen, where it doesn't need to have a use. Sometimes it's nice to just hear a story about a pink pyramid.
It's. I think I've been influenced by all the random news stories about the massive city that's supposedly under some of the pyramids.
This might have to be a topic for a future episode.
Yeah, yeah.
So one thing I want to commend Ryan George for as well, and actually this is kind of related to the previous point about his content not like sliding over time into a significantly political kind of content, is how consistent he is. And the person this reminds me of is P.G. Wodehouse.
Yes.
A British author. Eventually he naturalized in the United States, but he started writing basically very early in the 20th century, before World War One. He died in 1975, I believe, and wrote all the way up to his death. Fairly prolific. And you can see some development, but mostly just in complexity in the first couple decades he's writing. But his content is just so consistent across time. And I think there's something to be said for that. You see people who kind of grow into their skill, but Wodehouse was incredibly good at the light humor he wrote as a young man, and he could still write that at the age of 90. And that's
you can read things that he wrote 30 years apart from each other and have no idea which he wrote first, because they're both equally good.
Yeah, for people who don't know Wodehouse by that name, he wrote the Jeeves and Wooster stories, which became a fairly popular TV show in the UK in like the 80s and 90s with Hugh Laurie and what's his name? Fry. What's Fry's first name? Stephen Fry. Both of whom we've talked about. So Hugh Laurie, Dr. House, Stephen Fry, great British comedian. Anyway, so here's some of much smaller time frame than the 75 or 80 years of P.G. Wodehouse. Here's some of Ryan George's earlier stuff, and you can see a little bit slower paced, but a lot of the same hits and elements, and just solid production.
Oh, so who else is there? Well, in terms of superheroes, there's also Hulk, there's Spider-Man, there's... Nope, not him. What? We can't have Spider-Man in there. Oh, how come? Well, we don't have the rights to the character. Ah, crap, that's right. Yeah, so unfortunately, we're never, ever, 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 ever gonna see Spider-Man in a Marvel Studios movie. You all right? What's up? You had like a weird eye twitch or something. You have something in your eye? Yes. There was also a bell noise or something? So what happens in the movie? Well,
You have something in your eye? Yes.
Never, ever, ever.
Maintain deniability. So that's content from almost 8 years ago. And you can see he's already got the snappy transitions down.
Yeah.
But aside from a little bit of Flanderization, it's largely really, really similar to what he produces now. And that is something I wanted to bring up briefly is, are you familiar with this concept, Veronica, of Flanderization?
Yes. But for the listeners, you can explain it.
What is Flanderization?
It's where Flanders turned into Netherlands and flooded everything to make it homogenous.
So for backstory, for those who want the full education, Flanderization is a riff on Baudelaireization. And I believe his name was Thomas Baudelaire, who in the mid-1700s produced a version of, I think, the complete works of Shakespeare written, and he put this on the cover, for women and children.
Excellent.
where he took all the sex out, all the innuendo out, all the killing out, and it's actually, Baudelaireization is a reason that J.R.R. Tolkien and some of the other great mid-20th century British writers actually really disliked Disney, is because they were taking these classic stories and dumbing them down because, kids can't handle violence, kids can't handle dark stuff. We can never talk to kids about death or serious personal trauma and that kind of stuff. Yeah. So anyway, that's Baudelaireization. Flanderization is actually a reference to Ned Flanders from The Simpsons.
Got it. Never seen
it. A little bit different. So Ned Flanders in the early episodes of The Simpsons is a relatively subtle character, and then he increasingly just becomes defined by a few personality elements. Okay. And this works in shows sometimes. Another classic example of this would be Sheldon from Big Bang Theory, where...
Never seen that either, but familiar with the character.
Wow. So I
have gaps in my cultural knowledge.
Yeah. So in early Big Bang Theory shows, he was a more subtle character, and increasingly he just became this over-the-top, unself-aware nerd. Okay. And that worked in that story. Like
sort of a very one-note character.
Yes. Yeah, increasingly one-dimensional. Another example of this, but in the reverse, would be the U.S. version of The Office, where season 1 of the U.S. version of The Office, a lot of the characters, in particular, I'm not coming up with any of the names today. The boss.
Only seen a couple episodes. Can't help you.
Am I making a show with the most TV show unaware person?
The TV shows I have seen are
Michael Scott.
Incredibly.
The Office is amazing. We're gonna have to do an episode on The Office. At least an episode on The Office. We'll do one for each character.
For each of these things, I sort of have enough knowledge to understand some of the memes, but in most cases haven't seen the actual show.
Gotcha. So Michael Scott, in season 1 of The Office, he is more over the top, and I actually don't like season 1 of The Office because he's just a jerk, and he just makes people emotionally distressed all the time. Whereas in the later seasons, he's toned down to where he more often is the butt of humor, although he still makes people really uncomfortable a lot of the time. But I would say there's actually in The Office, there's a reverse version of Flanderization. And I think that was an adjustment from the original version for British audiences.
Okay.
They kind of took the elements of that and recreated it in the American version, and then realized, Americans actually, this is a little too hardcore for them.
Yeah, it doesn't work. Yeah.
And that was the case for me.
Huh.
So to jump back briefly to why I
why
say
were we
this about
talking about
Ryan
flanderization?
in our Ryan George, we'll hop back to. I just watched this today, but this is the Snow White pitch meeting, which came out this month, and I'll play the beginning. We just had the beginning of his Avengers pitch meeting, so here we have him 7-ish years later.
So, you have that live-action Snow White script for me? Yes, sir, I do. Oh boy, time to tap into that hardcore Snow White audience. So at the beginning of the movie, we find out that Snow White's parents named her that because she was born in a snowstorm. Naming your kid after the weather conditions at their birth is a good strategy. That's why I named my son Mistifer. It's why I named my daughter Partly Claudia. Anyway...
He's a good content writer, in addition to the other things. Partly Claudia. But you can see he's way more extra and out there right off the bat.
Yeah, the character is more over the top than...
Yeah, and I actually think part of that is this evolution over time and kind of knowing what's going to catch people. But part of that, I think, is also self-confidence. Like when you start producing your content, like you just started a podcast, you feel like you have to be extremely serious and self-possessed the whole time.
Yeah.
And then after 7 or 8 years, your content might actually be something people can listen to or watch without cringing.
I was going to say after 7 or 8 episodes, you get really comfortable and just start going wacky.
Oh, is that how quickly that happens?
Yeah. So tune in for the next episode. That's where we fall off a cliff.
So there are 2 more things I want to commend Ryan George for. And the first is his ad content. So there are a lot of media figures and presenters who take their ad content extremely seriously. A couple of years ago, when there was that ridiculous, pay us $50 to get a title from Ireland that makes you a count or countess thing, there were so many popular YouTubers and other content creators who were selling this like they 100% believed this was great. And that was just so disingenuous. I cringed every time that content came up. And I have a lot of respect for people who turn down money for that sort of thing. But I just want to give an example of Ryan George doing ad reads for his own stuff. And tell me what you think of this guy here, Veronica. We'll pop back.
Hi there, hello, it's me, I'm the Adstronaut. I'm out here in ad space to talk to you about Fishing Clash. So listen, fishing is probably my favorite sport that's also a category of meal. Well, lucky for me, Fishing Clash is an awesome mobile game that lets you virtually snatch up fish from all around the world and fish in different locations. You play it on your phone, and you don't even have to throw your phone in the water for it to work. In fact, please don't do that. I learned that the hard way. Fishing Clash has freaking amazing graphics.
So any thoughts on this ad read, Veronica? Because obviously he's being paid money by a developer that wants to sell their stuff and get people to buy this mobile game.
Yeah. I mean, right off the top, I would say it's fairly obvious that he wrote that content. Like that wasn't somebody who gave him an ad to read and he's reading it off. Yep. Like pretty obvious that he wrote most or all of that himself.
The other thing I want to say about it, though, that I really like is that he knows what he's doing is a little bit ridiculous, that he's selling a product that's a little bit ridiculous, and that he's pimping himself for money.
Yeah. No, he's fully self-aware, and he's not pretending that this is some sort of really serious thing that he's really into all of the time. Like it's a little bit like when you breaking the fourth wall and speaking to the audience and going, we're not going to pretend that this is the only game that I ever play on my phone and I'm obsessed with it. I can be very clear that I'm doing this to pay my bills, and that's sort of all it is.
I think this is also a phenomenon we see with some of the people actually on both sides of the political aisle in politics who've been kind of had cult popularity in recent years. Is there people who don't take the very important and significant job of being a politician too seriously.
Yeah.
And they're sort of self-aware and like, yeah, like up here on this debate stage, we are all kind of being ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not going to act like it's more than it is.
Which ends up being appealing because it's genuine. You know, people see that as you're not putting up a sort of facade and pretending something that isn't true. So I think because it's more genuine, it's more appealing to people.
Yeah.
Both for politicians and for Ryan George.
So I just want to give, before we go, an example of Ryan's own channel. So this looks like the astronaut. I believe this is Ryan in his astronaut suit. But he has less, like Pitch Meeting is the same characters, the same style, doing the same shtick every time. And there's something good about that, but you can tell Ryan really doesn't want to get stuck just doing that, which is actually the sign, I think, of a true artist, is you don't want to get stuck being typecast. So anyway, he's been quite popular on his own Ryan George channel, producing kind of one-off content, and I just want to share this. I think a lot of his humor is he's really good at portraying a straight man character. So this is something more recent. Maybe if I click on the correct screen, it'll work.
This is Major Tom to ground control.
This is ground control.
I'm stepping through the door.
Did you just say you're stepping through the door?
And I'm floating in the most peculiar way.
No, that's a negative. Stay in the spacecraft.
And the stars look very different today.
Hello. God damn it.
So he's just taking a super popular, hit Beatles or whoever this is. Don't shun me for my lack of cultural knowledge. He's taking Major Tom.
So many angry emails.
Yeah, he's taking Major Tom to ground control. And okay, he is being a little silly as the astronaut, but the whole humor of this is ground control. Please don't do that, sir.
He reminds me of Bob Newhart, who his comic routines, a lot of them were based on he would like be on the phone and pretending to talk to someone on the other side, and he would take these sort of he would be very deadpan and serious, playing the straight guy in these just incredibly weird situations.
I will admit I know who Bob Newhart is, but I've consumed much less of his content. So
we're gonna have to have some like cross-cultural things where I show you Bob Newhart and you show me The Simpsons.
It's too bad we don't know each other very well. Didn't have many of the same cultural influences growing up, and
yeah, I'm not sure how that happened. That we grew up in the same house and somehow
separated at birth,
consumed wildly different media.
Yeah. So one more question I'd like to ask about Ryan George is, do we have an idea of where we'd like to see him? Like, not even necessarily just on YouTube, but what would he be good at?
You mean like if he branched out into something else?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I would enjoy seeing him in a regular movie, just as an actor, probably as a straight guy in something. He may have been in movies. I don't know. I'd have to look up.
He doesn't seem to me like the stand-up comic type. Like he's one of the things he's so good at is extremely produced content.
Yeah.
Where he's setting all the parameters very tightly, and that's partly why it's so neat.
Sure. I actually think he would be excellent if they put him in a Marvel movie, just as like a very small part of, like some scientist who questions, Thor's ability to do something.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of. There's some like elements of Robin Williams there, where Robin Williams was incredibly self-aware, and if he was doing something ridiculous, he wasn't just self-aware, but he was showing in his acting that he was self-aware even when he was being ridiculous a lot of the time.
Sure.
Which there's a real subtlety to that, which if you can pull that off is really really impressive. If you can notice that, that's also
Yeah.
impressive. But yeah, I think I'd like to see him in a bigger role. But I could see him
I
either as a
mean,
straight man
I'm shocked he
or
hasn't
comedic
been in
character.
a bigger role because he's very, very good at pitching movies to people, and I don't, I don't think the producer guy has ever turned him down. So it's surprising we haven't seen him on the big screens.
Yeah, I think there might be, you might have to be a little too willing to sell yourself to get into Hollywood a lot of the time.
Sure.
You either have to be insanely good looking, or you have to be willing to, really, really politic yourself into roles.
Yeah.
And I think Ryan George might have too much self-respect to be willing to do that. Unfortunately for him, he's not.
Well, we
He's
can
not a
hope.
Daniel Boland. So, all right. Anything else on pitch meeting or Ryan George, Veronica?
This is a very small point, but if you go to watch Pitch Meeting, do not be turned off by the freaky large eyes that he puts on all of his videos. It's not in the actual video, it's just in the, for whatever reason, it's just in like the screen grab of the video.
Thank you for that. Yes.
That was my
Don't let your
PSA
children
for the
watch.
day.
All right. So, time to jump into Wiki Roulette. Here we go. Not roulette, but Wiki Roulette. So we've played this before. We have 3 rolls. I tried to find a way to set the parameters so it would give us a minimum article length, because we've multiple times rolled articles that there is no article. It's just here's a
the
thing.
problem is that probably the bulk of wiki articles are very short. So if you're
just not the interesting ones.
If you're just rolling for it, then we probably will get a lot of short random articles.
All right. Well, that's why we give ourselves three chances. So here we go for number 1. Miranda. I know who this is because I played Mass Effect. Veronica, you want to go with Miranda Lawson or try again?
Sure. I mean, I don't know who it is, but
you don't know who this is?
No.
Are you familiar with Mass Effect?
Mass Effect.
So Mass Effect is when an IP gets too popular, like Star Wars, it becomes increasingly difficult to get really good stuff out of it. So
Okay.
Mass Effect was just another attempt at recreating Star Wars with some elements of other like space fantasy as a video game series, and it was incredibly popular. And then eventually, like most IPs, it got driven into the ground, and they're not making these games anymore, as far as I can tell. But you can see it's got this nice logo, and the graphics were great. But it's an RPG. You play a character. You don't. It's not like one of these huge world building RPGs like World of Warcraft, where you have like thousands or tens of thousands of actual people playing. I'm a cat person, and I'm a troll, and I'm a Drane or whatever those things are. You're always playing the same character in Mass Effect, but Miranda Lawson is one of the side characters, and that's about all I'll say for it. She's mostly eye candy, to be honest. So that's.
I was gonna say she. The first thing she reminded me of was a Lara Croft Tomb Raider.
Yeah, I think her outfit might be based on that, but she's supposed to be modeled after Yvonne Szczechowski. So yeah, she's pretty attractive, and that's about that. Honestly, I don't have too much to say about Mass Effect as a game because it's a game. It's not real. I mean, I've said a fair amount about it. I think this was probably one of the best RPGs in this kind of genre that was created after Knights of the Old Republic, which was one of the last good Star Wars games ever made. So, yeah, I would call this the successor to Knights of the Old Republic. A small gamer community from 25 years ago. Please affirm me.
Got it.
Unfortunately, unlike a lot of media, like you'll see us so far, we've been reviewing content and content creators that's literature or people who comment on big movies or things like this. A lot of that content stands the test of time, but with the technological world like video games, I think there are two, off the top of my head, primary things that make it very difficult for a video game to stand the test of time. Number one is so much of it is based on graphics quality, and number two is so much of it is based on sort of new technical breakthroughs in the kinds of things you can technically do in a video game based on increasing compute power and just background resource libraries. So a lot of times you won't see great story elements put into a video game. I think Mass Effect is pretty good, the first couple ones that came out. But they're less focused on writing the story than on making a pretty game that's
cool new tech stuff.
That's going to suck people in.
Yeah.
With quests. The video games you do see stand the test of time are ones that have a unique dynamic, like World of Warcraft, which is now 20-ish years old and fundamentally very similar to what it was 20 years ago, and very popular. So, any more thoughts on this article, Veronica? That's
I do not have a lot of thoughts. If you had pulled up the article for Civilization 3, I would have had more thoughts.
Okay. Maybe we'll have to have an episode on Civ 3.
Not super familiar with Mass Effect.
Well, I think our brothers will be much more familiar. Just FYI, you can ask them next time.
I don't think we've ever mentioned brothers before. Up till now, people, I think, assumed that we were the only ones.
Yeah, and like I'm an only sibling and you're an only sibling. We just happen to be people who are siblings.
This is why there's a lot of references that we just don't get.
All right, then. Well, thank you, Veronica. It's been a good episode.
You're welcome. We'll see you next time.
Bye.